The Forgeborn's fist came at me like a wrecking ball wrapped in burning meat, and I knew that if it connected with my skull, they would be scraping what passed for my brain off the sledge pit walls for the next 3 shifts. The impact never came. Instead, I threw myself sideways, feeling the displacement of air as 200 kilos of gene-wrought muscle and rage passed through the space where my head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The crowd of Goliaths watching from the pit's rim roared their approval, though whether they cheered for the monster's near miss or my survival, I could not say. Probably both. My name is Grak, and this was the moment that would decide whether I lived to see my 20th cycle or died as just another corpse fed to the reclamation vats beneath Hive Primus. The sledge pit stank of old blood, burnt promethium, and the sharp chemical bite of the growth stems that pumped through every Goliath's veins from the moment we emerged from the gene vats. The floor was scorched rockcrete, stained with decades of spilled vitae and slag residue, crisscrossed with drainage channels that glowed faint orange from the molten waste that flowed beneath. The heat rising from those channels was enough to blister unprotected skin, but we Goliaths were born for heat, bred for it. Our bodies were designed to work the forges, to stand before the furnaces where lesser men would cook in their own juices. The temperature in the pit was nothing compared to what waited in the forge halls above, where the air itself could ignite if you breathed wrong. I rolled to my feet, muscle memory from 10,000 training bouts guiding my movements. My body was a weapon that had been sharpened for this moment since the day the gene rights pulled me from the vat. 2 meters tall and massing close to 150 kilos of enhanced muscle tissue, I was by any baseline human standard a monster. But the Forgeborn I faced made me look like a child. It stood nearly 3 meters high, its body a grotesque parody of human form, gene-bulked and chem-enhanced until its muscles had muscles. Its skin stretched tight over the swollen mass of its altered physiology. Steam vented from crude bionics bolted to its spine, and its eyes were the dull red of overheated iron, devoid of anything resembling human intelligence. The creature had been a Goliath once, or something close to it. But the gene rights had taken it further, pushed it past the point where the human genome could maintain any pretense of stability. What remained was pure aggression wrapped in meat, a living weapon that knew only violence and the imperative to destroy whatever stood before it. This was what awaited Goliaths who failed, who showed weakness, who could not keep up with the brutal pace of stim-enhanced existence. The vats would take you back, remake you, strip away everything that made you a person and leave only the most basic functions. Strength, rage, obedience. I circled the Forgeborn, keeping my movements tight and controlled. The pit was maybe 20 meters across, small enough that there was nowhere to run, large enough that I had room to maneuver if I was smart about it. The watching gangers hammered their fists against the metal railings, the sound like thunder in the enclosed space, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my oversized heart. 300 beats per minute, resting. Higher when the stims kicked in. The chemical cocktail in my bloodstream was already responding to the threat, flooding my system with synthetic adrenaline, growth hormones, pain suppressors. My muscles swelled, veins standing out like cables beneath my skin. The edge of my vision went red and sharp. This was the final test to join Korg's gang as a full member, to transition from a vat-fresh prospect to a true Goliath warrior. I had passed the strength trials, lifted the sacred weights until my back screamed and my hands bled. I had endured the pain tests, sitting still while the gene rights injected me with stims that felt like molten metal in my veins. I had proven I could take punishment, standing in the beating circle while senior gangers worked me over with shock mauls and chain fists until I could barely stand. But this was different. This was combat. This was kill or be killed. And if I could not defeat the Forgeborn, I would become food for the reclamation vats, my protein recycled to feed the next generation of vat-born warriors. The Forgeborn charged again, its movement surprisingly quick for something so massive. It came straight at me. No strategy, no tactics, just pure animal fury. That was its weakness. The gene rights had stripped away everything human, but in doing so, they had also stripped away the capacity for thought, for adaptation. It could only do what its brainstem-level programming told it to do. Attack, destroy, kill. I had been counting on this. While my brothers celebrated strength without thought, I had been watching, learning, understanding that raw power meant nothing if you could not apply it effectively. I feinted left, then dove right as the Forgeborn committed to the false opening. Its momentum carried it past me, and I used those precious seconds to sprint for the far side of the pit, where one of the slag channels ran close to the surface. The rockcrete there was thinner, weakened by years of heat exposure. I had noticed it during my earlier observations of the pit, had filed away the information in case I needed it. The crowd's roar changed pitch, confusion mixing with anticipation. They expected me to stand and fight, to meet strength with strength in the approved Goliath manner. What I was doing looked like cowardice, like running. Korg's voice boomed from above, amplified by the vox grills built into his armor. "Stand and face it, whelp. Goliaths don't run." I ignored him. The Forgeborn had recovered from its charge and was turning, steam venting from its bio-implants as its enhanced metabolism burned hot with exertion. Its red eyes fixed on me, and it began to advance with that same relentless, thoughtless aggression. I backed up until I felt the heat of the slag channel through the soles of my boots, then planted my feet and braced. This was the gamble. This, if I had miscalculated the structural integrity of the rockcrete, I would go through the floor myself, and the molten slag would cook me before I could climb out. If the Forgeborn was lighter than I estimated, it would stop short of the weak point. The creature charged. The pit shook with its footfalls, each step a small earthquake of muscle and bone and augmented mass. 5 meters, 3, 1. I waited until the last possible moment, until I could smell the rancid stink of its breath and see the individual scars on its malformed face. Then I threw myself aside. The Forgeborn tried to stop, its gene-boosted muscles straining against its own momentum. But physics is an unforgiving master. It hit the weak point in the rockcrete doing maybe 40 kilometers per hour. And 300 kilos of gene-wrought meat is a lot of kinetic energy to dissipate. The floor gave way with a sound like breaking bones. The Forgeborn went through in a shower of rockcrete fragments and superheated dust, and its roar of rage turned into a shriek of pain as it hit the molten slag below. The heat was incredible, a physical wall of force that drove me back even from my position several meters away. The stink of cooking meat filled the pit, overwhelming even the usual chemical reek. The Forgeborn thrashed for maybe 5 seconds, its enhanced physiology fighting against the simple fact that organic tissue cannot survive contact with liquid metal heated to several thousand degrees. Then it stopped moving, and there was only the soft crackling sound of fat rendering and bone charring. Silence fell over the sledge pit. The gangers stared at me, their expressions unreadable behind the crude rebreathers and chem masks most of them wore. I stood at the edge of the broken floor, breathing hard, my body still flooded with combat stims, and waited for judgment. I had won, but I had not won in the approved manner. I had used strategy instead of strength, cunning instead of raw power. In Goliath culture, this was a dangerous thing. We were bred to be weapons, not thinkers. Intelligence was suspect, potentially a sign of the weakness that came from too much baseline human genetic material contaminating the sacred gene stock. Korg descended into the pit, his massive frame making the metal stairs groan under his weight. He was everything a forged tyrant should be. 2.5 meters of scarred muscle and crude bionics, his body a testament to decades of violence. He had lost his left arm below the elbow years ago, replaced it with a massive power claw that could tear through plasteel. His face was a ruin of burn scars and poorly healed breaks, one eye replaced with a targeting augmetic that glowed a baleful red. He carried a heavy bolter maglock to his back, the weapon's bulk enough to break a normal man's spine just from the weight. He stopped at the edge of the collapsed floor, looked down at the charred remains of the Forgeborn, then turned that mechanical eye on me. "You won," he said. His voice was like grinding metal, damaged vocal cords never properly repaired. "But you didn't fight, you tricked it." I met his gaze, keeping my own face carefully neutral. "The Forgeborn is dead. I'm alive. That's what matters." "Is it?" Korg took a step closer. Around the rim of the pit I could see other gangers gathering, their hands drifting toward weapons. If Korg decided I had violated gang honor, they would tear me apart before I could take 3 steps. "Goliaths are strong. We don't need tricks. We don't need to think. We just need to hit harder than whatever's trying to kill us." "Then why do you have a forge, tyrant?" I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The stims in my blood were making me reckless, pushing me toward confrontation. If all we needed was strength, the strongest ganger would lead. But you lead because you know when to attack and when to hold back. Because you can plan raids and manage territory. That takes more than muscle. For a long moment, Korg just stared at me. Then to my surprise, he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, more like the coughing of a malfunctioning engine, but it was genuine. "You got guts, whelp. Stupid guts, but guts." He turned to address the watching gangers. "Grak passes the trial. He's one of us now." The cheers that erupted were mixed with grumbling, but they were there. I had been accepted barely with reservations, but accepted nonetheless. As the gangers began to file out of the pit, heading back to the forge halls and whatever duties awaited them, one figure remained behind. Vorlag. He was a pure specimen of what the gene rights aimed for when they created us, standing taller than me by half a head. His muscle mass probably 20 kilos heavier. His skin was the color of old steel, stretched tight over slabs of enhanced tissue that made him look carved rather than born. His face had the typical Goliath features: heavy brow, broad jaw, nose that had been broken and reset so many times it was just a mass of scar tissue. But his eyes were what drew attention. They were the flat, affectless eyes of someone who had never had a thought more complex than hit it until it stops moving. "That was weak," Vorlag said. His voice matched his appearance, slow and heavy, each word delivered with the same mechanical precision. "You won like a rat, not like a Goliath." I felt my jaw tighten. The stims in my system were still running hot, filling me with artificial aggression that made every word feel like a challenge that demanded a physical response. But I had learned enough about gang politics to know that I could not afford to fight Vorlag right now. Not yet. Not until I had support, resources, a position within the gang hierarchy that would protect me from being labeled a troublemaker and disappeared into the reclamation vats. "I won," I said simply. "That's what matters." Vorlag's expression did not change. "We'll see. When we're in a real fight, when there's no pit to hide in, we'll see if your tricks keep you alive." He turned and walked away, his heavy footfalls making the damaged rockcrete crack further. I watched him go, understanding with perfect clarity that I had just made an enemy. In the violent, hierarchical world of a Goliath gang, this was potentially fatal. But I had no choice. I was what I was, a Goliath whose gene seed had produced not just enhanced muscle mass, but also enhanced cognitive function. The same processes that made me strong had also made me smart, and in a culture that celebrated mindless violence, that made me dangerous in more ways than one. The raid on the Escher Chemstill came 3 days later. I had spent those days learning the rhythms of gang life, the brutal routine that defined existence in House Goliath's territory. We lived in the forge halls of Hive Primus's industrial sector, a nightmare landscape of molten metal and grinding machinery that operated 26 hours a day, every day, year after year. The heat was constant, the air thick with chemical fumes and metal particulates that would kill a baseline human in hours. We breathed it like it was natural, our enhanced lungs filtering out most of the toxins, our thick skin resistant to the minor burns that came from ambient heat radiation. The gang occupied a section of forge works that had been abandoned by the original workers after a catastrophic meltdown killed 200 menials and contaminated the area with exotic radiation. For normal humans, the background rad count would mean slow death from cancer and cellular breakdown. For us, it was just another environmental hazard, no worse than the stims we injected 3 times a day to maintain our enhanced physiology. We slept in shifts on metal bunks welded to the walls, ate protein slop that tasted like recycled corpse starch because that was exactly what it was, and spent our waking hours either maintaining our weapons and gear or engaging in the brutal training exercises that kept our combat skills sharp. The morning of the raid, I woke to the sound of Korg's vox-amplified voice echoing through the sleeping chambers. "All gangers assemble in the muster hall, we got a job." I rolled out of my bunk, my body protesting the movement with a dozen different aches and pains. The stims kept us strong, but they extracted a price. My joints ached from the constant stress of supporting my enhanced muscle mass. My bones, reinforced with ceramic composite grown into the marrow during vat gestation, creaked like stressed metal. My skin, thickened to resist heat and impact, felt tight and uncomfortable, like wearing armor made of my own flesh. This was normal. This was what it meant to be Goliath. We were born in pain, lived in pain, and would die in pain. The only question was whether that death would come in combat, serving the Emperor and House Goliath, or in the reclamation vats after our bodies finally broke under the strain of our own enhanced physiology. The muster hall was a cleared section of the forge works, a space where the machinery had been pushed aside to create room for the gang to gather. 53 gangers stood in rough formation, everything from fresh prospects like me to scarred veterans who had been fighting for House Goliath since before I was decanted from my vat. Korg stood on a raised platform made of stacked metal crates, his power claw crackling with barely contained energy as he addressed us. "The Escher bitches have been getting bold," he growled. "They set up a chem still in territory that belongs to us. They think because they're sneaky and fast they can take what's ours. They think we're too slow and stupid to do anything about it." He paused, his mechanical eye sweeping across the assembled gangers. "Tonight, we're going to show them what happens when you disrespect House Goliath. We're going to take that still, kill anyone who gets in our way, and remind the entire hive that our territory is ours because we're strong enough to hold it." The gangers roared their approval, hammering fists against chest plates and stomping their heavy boots against the metal floor. The sound was like thunder, a physical force that made the air vibrate. I joined in, letting the aggression of the moment wash over me, feeling the familiar rush of the stims responding to my elevated heart rate. This was what we were made for: violence, combat, the application of overwhelming force to any problem that presented itself. The Escher territory we were raiding was maybe 3 kilometers from our forge hold, a journey that would take us through the tangled maze of the underhive, across walkways suspended over bottomless chasms where the air itself was toxic, through hab blocks where desperate gangers and ordinary citizens watched our passage with fear and hatred in equal measure. We moved in combat formation, heavy weapons at the front and rear, lighter troops in the middle, scouts ranging ahead to watch for ambushes. I was assigned to the middle ranks, carrying a battered autogun that was older than I was and a bandolier of frag grenades that felt reassuringly heavy across my chest. Vorlag was in my squad along with 5 other gangers. Our leader was a veteran named Thresh, a scarred monster who had lost most of his teeth to an Orlok bullet and never bothered to replace them. He moved with the confidence of someone who had survived 100 fights, his heavy stubber cradled in arms that looked capable of tearing a man in half. He did not speak much, just grunted orders and expected instant obedience. That was fine. I had learned to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open to watch and learn while letting others think I was just another dumb muscle. The Escher still was located in an old Medici facility, the kind of place where desperate hivers came to die when they could not afford proper treatment. The Eschers had taken it over, turned the operating theaters into chem labs, used the ventilation systems to vent their toxic fumes up into higher levels where they would poison someone else's territory. It was a good position, defensible, with multiple entrance points and clear sight lines. Taking it would be expensive in lives and ammunition, but Korg had decided it needed to be done, so we would do it, and whatever the cost, we would pay it. We hit them just before the shift change, when the Escher workers would be tired and the new shift would not yet be in position. The attack began with Korg's heavy bolter opening up on the main entrance, mass reactive rounds punching through the rusted metal doors and detonating inside. The explosions were loud enough to hurt even through our audio dampeners, sharp cracks that echoed across the underhive and announced to everyone within kilometers that House Goliath was going to war. Then we were moving, pouring through the breach in a tide of muscle and metal. The Eschers were ready for us, their laser guns spitting coherent light that burned through armor and flesh with equal ease. A ganger next to me took a shot through the chest, the last beam punching through his breastplate and flash-cooking his internal organs. He went down without a sound, dead before he hit the floor. Another took a shot to the face, the coherent light beam turning his head into superheated steam and charred bone fragments. The casualties did not slow us. Could not slow us. We were Goliath and we did not retreat. I fired my autogun in controlled bursts, the weapon's recoil jarring against my shoulder despite my enhanced strength. The rounds were solid slug, low-tech but reliable, and they did the job. I saw an Escher ganger go down with her chest torn open. Saw another lose an arm at the elbow when one of my shots severed bone and tendon. The return fire was intense, laser guns and chem weapons filling the air with light and poison. I felt something burn across my shoulder, looked down to see a shallow las burn that had carved through my armor and taken a strip of flesh with it. The pain was distant, muted by the suppressors in my blood, just another datum to be processed and ignored. We pushed deeper into the facility, room by room, corridor by corridor. The Eschers fought hard, using their superior speed and coordination to harry us, fall back, hit us from new angles. But they could not stand against our raw power. When a door was locked, we kicked it down. When a corridor was blocked, we went through the walls. When they fell back to a prepared position, we threw grenades until the position ceased to exist. This was the Goliath way. No subtlety, no clever tactics, just overwhelming application of force until the enemy broke or died. I saw Vorlog fight for the first time during that raid, and understood why he was respected despite his limited intelligence. He was magnificent in combat, a perfect expression of what our gene rights had tried to create. He moved through the Escher positions like a force of nature, his massive fists crushing skulls and breaking spines, his autogun firing on full automatic until the barrel glowed red with heat. He took multiple last hits and kept fighting, took a face full of chem spray that would have blinded a normal man and just roared louder. He was everything a Goliath should be, and watching him made me understand the danger I was in. In a culture that valued pure physical dominance, his kind would always have the advantage. We took the still after 2 hours of fighting. The cost was 12 dead gangers and another 8 wounded badly enough that they would need serious medical attention. For a force of 53, that was acceptable losses. We had accomplished our objective, seized valuable equipment, and sent a message to the other gangs. The Escher survivors fled into the deeper underhive, abandoning their territory and their dead. We did not pursue. Korg knew that chasing a retreating enemy into unfamiliar territory was a good way to walk into an ambush. Instead, we secured the facility, set up defensive positions, and waited for the salvage crews to arrive. I spent the waiting time tending to my shoulder wound, using a medkit to clean the last burn and seal it with synth skin. The pain had started to come through as the combat stims wore off, a dull throb that would get worse over the next few hours. Around me, other gangers were doing the same, patching wounds, reloading weapons, and talking about the fight in the loud, aggressive manner that characterized all Goliath conversation. The dead were laid out in a corner, their bodies to be returned to the forge hold for reclamation. Nothing was wasted in the underhive. Their protein would feed the next generation. Their gear would be redistributed to those who could use it. Their names would be added to the honor rolls carved into the forge walls, and in a few years no one would remember exactly who they had been. Korg walked through the facility, inspecting our prize with his mechanical eye. The chem still was a sophisticated piece of equipment, far more advanced than anything we could have built ourselves. The Eschers were known for their expertise with chemicals and toxins, and this still was evidence of that skill. It could produce everything from basic combat stims to exotic poisons, and all of it would now flow into House Goliath's coffers. Korg seemed pleased, which was as close to happy as he ever got. He clapped gangers on the shoulder, grunted approval at the wounded, and generally acted like the raid had been a complete success. I was not so sure. 12 dead was a lot, especially when 10 of them had died to Escher traps and chemical weapons rather than in straight combat. We had won through overwhelming force, but the Eschers had made us pay for every meter of ground. If they had been willing to stand and fight instead of falling back, the casualties would have been much worse. I found myself wondering if there was a better way to conduct raids, a method that would accomplish the objective without bleeding the gang dry. But when I looked at the other gangers, at their satisfied expressions and casual dismissal of the dead, I understood that I was alone in this thinking. To them, casualties were inevitable. The strong survived, the weak died. That was the natural order. Vorlog found me as I was finishing with my shoulder wound. He looked me up and down, his flat eyes taking in my injuries with the same expression he might use to evaluate a piece of equipment. "You fought okay," he said grudgingly. "For a thinker." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The stims were still in my system, making me aggressive and short-tempered. Getting into an argument with Vorlag right now would be a mistake. He seemed to take my silence as agreement. Or maybe he just did not care. He turned and walked away, heading toward where Thresh was organizing the defensive perimeter. I watched him go, understanding that in his own way he had just paid me a compliment. In Goliath culture, acknowledging someone's combat performance was as close to friendship as most gangers got. The days that followed the raid settled into a rhythm that I came to understand as normal gang life. We were not always fighting, not always on raids or defending territory. Most of our time was spent in the brutal routine of maintaining our combat readiness, keeping our weapons functional, and managing the constant physical toll of our enhanced physiology. The forge halls where we lived were never quiet, the machinery running day and night, producing the munitions and equipment that House Goliath sold to other gangs and Imperial forces. We were part of that production chain, assigned shifts working the heavy machinery when we were not training or fighting. The work was brutal even by Goliath standards. I spent 8-hour shifts hauling raw materials, feeding the furnaces, operating the massive hammers that shaped metal into weapons and armor. The heat was incredible, bad enough that even our enhanced physiology struggled. I watched gangers collapse from heat exhaustion, their bodies simply shutting down as their internal temperature exceeded safe levels. They would be dragged to the cooling stations, doused with recycled water, and sent back to work as soon as they could stand. Complaining was not an option. Showing weakness was grounds for being sent to the vats. The worst part was the stims. 3 times a day, every day, we lined up at the chem dispensaries where the naturals administered our injections. The naturals were Goliaths who had proven themselves too valuable to risk in combat. Gangers whose expertise with chemistry and biology made them essential to maintaining the gene stock. They treated us like livestock, which in a sense we were. They checked our vitals, adjusted our dosages, and injected us with cocktails of growth hormones, synthetic testosterone, metabolic accelerators, and pain suppressors that kept our enhanced bodies functional. The injections hurt. Not the needle, that was nothing, but the chemicals themselves burned like fire in the veins. I would stand there with my teeth clenched, feeling the stims spread through my system, feeling my muscles swell and my heart rate spike and my temperature rise. The pain would last maybe 5 minutes, then fade to the constant background ache that every Goliath lived with. The naturals said the pain meant the stims were working, that our bodies were responding properly to the chemical enhancement. I believed them because I had to. The alternative was to admit that we were destroying ourselves, burning through our own biology in exchange for a few extra years of enhanced performance. I saw gangers die from the stims. Heart attacks mostly, when their enhanced cardiovascular systems finally gave out under the strain. Or organ failure when their kidneys or liver could no longer process the toxic load we subjected them to. Or cancers, aggressive tumors that grew at accelerated rates thanks to the growth hormones. The oldest Goliath in our gang was maybe 45, and he looked 70, his body a ruin of scar tissue and failing augments. That was our future, all of us. We would fight and work and inject ourselves with chemicals until our bodies broke. And then we would be sent to the vats, and a new generation of vat-born would take our place. Vorlag tested me constantly during those weeks. He would challenge me to lifting contests, seeing who could hoist the heavier weights. Strength competitions where we would try to bend metal bars or crush pressure gauges. Endurance trials where we would see who could stand in the furnace heat longest without collapsing. I lost most of these contests. He was stronger than me, tougher, more physically capable in every measurable way. But I won often enough to maintain my position in the gang hierarchy, and I made sure never to win in ways that looked like I was outsmarting him. When I beat him at endurance, I made it look like pure, stubborn determination rather than superior mental discipline. The real test came on the Sump Slag Run, a dangerous expedition into the lawless territories below our forge hold. Korg had received intelligence about a crashed cargo hauler in the deep sump, a vessel that had gone down carrying military-grade weapons and equipment. The cargo was worth a fortune, but getting to it would require traveling through some of the most dangerous territory in the Underhive, places where the gangs maintained only nominal control and things far worse than human enemies lurked in the darkness. Korg gave me command of the mission, 10 gangers including myself, tasked with reaching the crash site, securing the cargo, and bringing it back intact. It was a test, I knew, a way to see if I could lead as well as fight. Vorlag was my second in command, which I also recognized as deliberate. Korg wanted to see how we worked together, whether my intelligence and Vorlag's strength could be combined into something effective, or whether we would tear each other apart. We descended into the sump through a series of maintenance shafts and access tunnels, following maps that were decades out of date and probably inaccurate even when they were new. The temperature dropped as we left the forge levels behind, the oppressive heat giving way to a clammy cold that felt wrong after so long in the furnace halls. The air changed too. No longer the hot metal reek of the forges, but something fouler. A combination of chemical waste and organic decay that made even our enhanced lungs struggle. The sump was a nightmare landscape of toxic pools and corroded metal. the accumulated industrial waste of millennia of hive production. The walls dripped with condensation that burned skin on contact. The floor was unstable, liable to give way and drop you into pools of chemical sludge that would dissolve flesh from bone. Strange fungi grew in clusters on every surface, some glowing with bioluminescence, others releasing clouds of spores that could cause hallucinations or respiratory collapse. This was the bottom of the hive, the foundation upon which all the glory and industry above was built, and it was a vision of hell. We found the cargo hauler 3 hours into the descent, its broken hull wedged between 2 support columns in a chamber maybe 200 meters across. The vessel had gone down hard, its armor cracked and split, its contents spilled across the chamber floor. But the cargo was still there, crates of laser guns and munitions, a fortune in military hardware just waiting to be claimed. I ordered the gangers to secure the perimeter while Vorlag and I checked the cargo, making sure it was real and not some kind of trap. That was when the Orlocks hit us. They came from above, dropping down from access tunnels we had not even known existed. 20 of them, maybe more. Their mining equipment converted into weapons, their faces hidden behind crude respirators. Orlocks were tough, nearly as physically capable as Goliaths, but they fought smart, using their knowledge of the Underhive's structure to their advantage. They had the high ground, and they used it, pouring fire down on us while we scrambled for cover among the cargo crates. I took command without thinking, years of combat training overriding conscious thought. Vorlag, take half the squad and flank left. The rest of you suppressing fire. My autogun was already up and firing, sending rounds into the darkness where muzzle flashes marked enemy positions. The return fire was intense, solid slug and last fire filling the air. One of our gangers went down with a bullet through the throat, drowning in his own blood. Another took a last hit to the leg and fell screaming. We returned fire with everything we had, our weapons creating a wall of lead and last fire that forced the Orlocks to take cover. I saw Vorlag lead his group to the left, moving with surprising speed for someone his size, his heavy stubber already chattering as he advanced. For a moment I thought we might actually pull this off, might drive the Orlocks back and secure the cargo. Then I heard the rumble. It started as a vibration, a tremor in the corroded metal beneath our feet. Then it grew louder, a grinding sound like the world itself breaking apart. I looked up and saw the ceiling beginning to collapse, support beams giving way under some massive impact. And standing at the edge of the collapse zone, his heavy stubber still smoking, was Vorlag. He had not been firing at the Orlocks. He had been firing at the support structure, deliberately triggering a collapse that would bury me and half our squad. Fall back, I screamed, but it was too late. The ceiling came down in a cascade of rockcrete and metal, tons of debris falling like rain. I felt something massive hit my shoulder, driving me to my knees. The world went dark and full of thunder. I could not breathe, could not see, could only feel the crushing weight of the hive pressing down on me from above. This was it, I thought. This was how I died, buried alive in the dark while my own second-in-command watched. But the gene rights had built me well. My enhanced physiology kept me conscious even under the crushing weight, my reinforced bones refusing to break despite the pressure. I could feel the debris shifting, settling, and in that movement I found space to move. I began to dig, using my hands to shift chunks of rockcrete, creating a small pocket of air around my head. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I kept digging. Inch by inch, I worked my way toward where I remembered the surface being, following some instinct that set up was this direction, that freedom lay above. I broke through after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My hands punched through into open air and I hauled myself out of the debris pile like something being born. My armor was crushed, my body covered in cuts and bruises, but I was alive. Around me, the chamber was a ruin, The ceiling collapse had killed 3 of our gangers outright, buried under tons of rubble. The Orlocks had fled, probably assuming we were all dead. And Vorlog stood maybe 20 meters away, his stubber lowered, his expression unreadable. "You tried to kill me," I said. My voice was hoarse, my throat full of dust. Vorlag shrugged. "Ceiling was unstable, could have happened to anyone." I understood then. This was how it would be between us. He would try to kill me when he could make it look like an accident, when he could claim it was just bad luck or the hazards of gang life. And I would have to be constantly vigilant, always watching my back. Because the greatest threat was not the enemy in front of me, but the brother at my side who saw my intelligence as weakness. We recovered what cargo we could and made our way back to the forge hold. Korg received the weapons with his usual grunted approval, seemed unbothered by the casualties we had taken. 3 dead was acceptable losses for the value of the cargo we had recovered. He did not ask about the ceiling collapse, did not question why Vorlag had been firing at support beams instead of enemies. Maybe he knew. Maybe he did not care. In the brutal calculus of gang leadership, losing a few gangers to internal competition was just natural selection, the strong eliminating the weak. But I had learned something valuable during that mission. I had learned that I could not trust anyone, that in a gang where strength was the only virtue that mattered, my intelligence made me a target. I would need allies, resources, some way to protect myself that did not rely on pure physical power. And I would need to start thinking several steps ahead, because Vorlag was not going to stop trying to kill me, and next time I might not be lucky enough to survive. The Escher offensive began 3 weeks later, and it came in a form that no amount of Goliath strength could stop. They did not attack our positions directly, did not send gangers to fight in the approved manner. Instead, they did something far more insidious. They poisoned our stim supplies. The first sign was when gangers started getting sick during their injections. Instead of the usual burning sensation followed by enhanced performance, they experienced convulsions, vomiting, and in the worst cases, cardiac arrest. The naturals initially thought it was bad batches, contamination from our own production process. But as more gangers fell ill, as the symptoms became more severe, they realized this was deliberate sabotage. Someone had gotten into our stim vats and introduced a poison so subtle that it passed through our quality control, so carefully calibrated that it only became toxic when combined with our enhanced metabolism. It was killing us slowly, each injection adding more toxins to our systems, each dose bringing us closer to total organ failure. And without the stims, we could not function. Our enhanced bodies required constant chemical support. Stopping the injections would mean withdrawal, muscle atrophy, and eventual death as our own biology turned against us. Korg's response was exactly what I expected. He ordered direct assaults on known Escher positions, trying to use brute force to make them stop the poisoning campaign. It failed spectacularly. The Eschers had prepared for our attacks, set up kill zones and ambushes that slaughtered our gangers without ever facing them in direct combat. We lost 15 men in the first week, another 20 in the second. The gang was being destroyed, not by superior strength, but by superior tactics. I watched Korg during this time, saw the way the poison stims were affecting him. His massive frame was beginning to fail, muscles wasting despite the injections, his strength fading as his body tried to process toxins it was never designed to handle. His judgment was becoming impaired, his orders growing more desperate and less tactical. He was a good leader when the answer was to hit something, but this situation required a different approach, and he did not have the mental flexibility to adapt. I did something that would have gotten me killed if anyone had discovered it. I left our territory, traveled through neutral zones to a place where the Dalak operated. The Dalak were information brokers, gangers who traded in secrets rather than physical violence. They were everything Goliaths despised, weak and sneaky and far too clever for their own good. But they knew things, and right now I needed knowledge more than I needed muscle. I met with a Delake agent in the abandoned hab block, a small man whose eyes were hidden behind dark lenses and whose body language suggested he could disappear into shadows if the meeting went wrong. He knew who I was, what I was, and he named his price immediately. Information about the Escher Matriarch's operations will cost you. I want access to your forge works for 1 day, no questions asked, no interference. I agreed without hesitation, knowing I was probably condemning myself. Giving outside gangs access to our territory was treason of the highest order. But the alternative was watching my entire gang die from poisoned stims. The Delak provided what I needed: detailed maps of the Escher territory, information about their leadership structure, and most importantly, the location of their matriarch's personal chem lab where the poison was being produced. The knowledge felt like carrying a live grenade. I could not act on it immediately without revealing how I had acquired the information. I could not share it with Korg without admitting I had dealt with the Delak. I was trapped by my own cleverness, sitting on information that could save the gang while unable to use it without destroying myself. Then Vorlag made his move. He had been watching me, had somehow learned about my meeting with the Delak. Maybe he had followed me, or maybe someone had sold the information. Either way, he went to Korg and exposed what I had done. The reaction was immediate and severe. Korg summoned the entire gang to the sledge pit, had me dragged before them in chains. His mechanical eye focused on me with what might have been disappointment, or might have been rage. "You dealt with Delake," he said, his voice amplified across the assembled gangers. "You violated gang honor. You showed weakness." "I was trying to save the gang," I said. "The Eschers are killing us with their poison. Hitting them harder isn't working. We need information to strike at the source." "We need strength," Vorlag shouted from where he stood at the front of the crowd. "Not tricks and deals with sneaks. You're weak, Grak. You've always been weak. And now you're trying to make the rest of us weak too." He stepped forward and I saw what was coming. "I challenge you for leadership of this gang. Trial by combat. Winner leads the attack on the Eschers. Loser feeds the vats." Korg looked between us, his failing body swaying slightly. For a moment I thought he might refuse the challenge, might simply have me executed for dealing with outsiders. But gang law was sacred even to a dying forge tyrant. If a challenge was issued, it had to be answered. He nodded slowly. "The challenge is accepted. You fight tomorrow at dawn. Winner takes the gang." They locked me in a holding cell that night, a bare metal cage barely large enough to stand in. I had no weapons, no equipment, no stims. Vorlag would come to the fight fresh and enhanced, every advantage on his side. The smart play would be to accept defeat, to beg for mercy and hope Korg would commute my sentence to exile instead of the vats. But I had never been good at accepting defeat. I spent the night thinking, analyzing, planning. Vorlag was stronger, faster, more physically capable in every way. But I had learned something during my time with the gang. I had learned how our stims worked, what they did to our bodies and what their weaknesses were. The Delak had given me information about Escher combat chemistry, but they had also shared knowledge about various stim formulations used throughout the Underhive. And one thing I remembered was a specific interaction between certain growth hormones and cardiovascular stimulants, a combination that could cause fatal arrhythmias in subjects under extreme stress. Vorlag's batch of stims, the specific formulation the naturals had been giving him, included both those compounds. All I had to do was push him hard enough, get his heart rate high enough, and his own chemistry would kill him. It was a gamble. I would have to survive long enough for the effect to manifest. Would have to make him exert himself beyond safe limits while staying alive myself. but it was the only chance I had. Dawn came too quickly. They dragged me from the cell and threw me into the sledge pit, the same arena where I had fought the Forgeborn months ago. Vorlag was already there, his massive frame looking even larger than usual, pumped full of pre-combat stims that made his veins stand out like cables and his eyes glow with chemical fury. He carried no weapons, neither did I. This would be a pure test of strength. Goliath against Goliath, the way our ancestors had settled disputes before the gene rights had enhanced us into monsters. Korg stood at the edge of the pit, his power claw raised. "Fight until one of you can't continue. No mercy, no surrender. The Emperor protects the strong." He brought the claw down and Vorlag charged. The impact when he hit me was like being struck by a cargo hauler. I flew backward, crashed into the pit wall hard enough to crack rockcrete, felt ribs break under the force of the blow. Pain exploded through my chest, sharp and immediate despite the residual stims in my system. Vorlag followed up with a kick aimed at my head, and I barely rolled aside in time, felt the displacement of air as his boot passed centimeters from my skull. I could not trade blows with him, could not match strength for strength. I had to fight smart, make him work for every hit, tire him out while preserving my own energy. I scrambled away, putting distance between us, and he pursued with single-minded determination. This was his element, pure physical violence, the test of who could hit harder and take more damage. He was grinning, showing teeth that had been filed to points in the Goliath tradition. "You can't run forever," he roared. "Stand and fight like a real Goliath." I did not answer. Speech was a waste of breath I would need for survival. Instead, I focused on movement, on staying out of range of those massive fists while looking for openings. Vorlag was strong but not agile. His enhanced muscle mass made him powerful but slowed his reactions. I used that, feinted left and dodged right when he committed to a strike, let him hit empty air while I scored minor hits on his sides and back. The blows I landed would not stop him. My fists felt like they were hitting slabs of meat over ceramic armor every time I connected. But that was not the point. The point was to make him chase me, to keep his heart rate elevated, to force his system to work harder and harder. I could see it starting to take effect after maybe 10 minutes of constant movement. His breathing was becoming labored, his movements slightly less coordinated. The stims in his blood were demanding oxygen his cardiovascular system could not quite supply at the required rate. He caught me with a backhand that sent me spinning, stars exploding across my vision. My jaw felt dislocated, blood filling my mouth from a badly bitten tongue. I went down hard and Vorlag was on me immediately, his weight crushing down as he pinned me to the pit floor. His hands closed around my throat, massive fingers cutting off my air supply. "Going to choke you slow," he growled, his face centimeters from mine. "Going to watch you die knowing you were weak." I could not breathe, could not speak, could barely see through the red haze that was filling my vision as my oxygen-starved brain began to shut down. But I could move my arms. I brought them up, not to break his grip, that was impossible, but to hammer my fists into his chest, right over his heart, again and again, striking with every bit of strength I had left, feeling ribs crack under my enhanced knuckles. His grip loosened, just slightly. His expression changed from rage to confusion, then to fear. His heart was betraying him, the combination of extreme exertion and flawed stim chemistry creating the fatal arrhythmia I had gambled on. His hands fell away from my throat as he clutched at his chest, his face going pale under his gray skin. He tried to stand, took one staggering step, then collapsed. I crawled away, gasping for air, my throat on fire from where he had been choking me. Around the pit, the assembled gangers were silent, watching as Vorlag thrashed on the ground, his body convulsing as his heart tried and failed to maintain a stable rhythm. I could have ended it quickly, could have put him out of his misery, Instead, I watched. Watched as the strongest Goliath I had ever known died not from violence but from his own enhanced physiology turning against him. It took maybe 2 minutes, then he was still, his eyes staring at nothing, his massive frame suddenly looking empty without life animating it. I stood on trembling legs and looked up at Korg. The forge tyrant stared back at me, his mechanical eye whirring as it refocused. Then he nodded slowly. Grak wins. He's your new forge tyrant now. The title hit me like a physical weight. Forge tyrant, leader of the gang, responsible for 50+ gangers, for their lives, their equipment, their survival in the brutal hierarchy of the Underhive. I looked at their faces, saw suspicion and doubt mixed with the respect owed to someone who had just won a formal challenge. They would follow me because gang law demanded it, but I would have to prove myself worthy of the position. I made my first decision as leader immediately. We're hitting the Escher Chem Lab tonight, not a frontal assault. We're going in quiet, taking out their matriarch and destroying their poison production before they can use it against us again. One of the veterans spoke up, an old ganger named Kresh who had been with Korg since before I was decanted. That's not the Goliath way. We hit hard and fast, overwhelming force. And it's been getting us killed, I said. The Eschers aren't going to fight us straight. They're going to keep poisoning us, keep wearing us down until there's nothing left. We need to think like they think, hit them where they're weak instead of charging into their strength. I saw doubt in their faces, saw the cultural resistance to anything that looked like cleverness instead of pure aggression. But I also saw the bodies of the gangers who had died from poisoned stims, saw Korg's wasting frame, saw the evidence that the old way was failing. Finally, Kresh nodded. You're the forge tyrant. We follow your lead. But if this goes wrong, you're the one who answers for it. I spent the rest of the day planning the raid with a level of detail that would have been foreign to Korg. I studied the maps the Delak had provided, identified entry points and escape routes, assigned roles based on each ganger's capabilities rather than just their strength. I pulled aside the sneakiest members of the gang, the ones who could move quietly despite their enhanced bulk, and put them in charge of infiltration. The heavy hitters I held in reserve, ready to come in if we were discovered and needed to fight our way out. We hit the Escher Chem Lab 3 hours after dark, moving through the Underhive's back passages and maintenance tunnels. The facility was in an old pharmacia complex, multiple levels of production equipment guarded by Escher gangers who thought they were safe behind layers of security. We bypassed the main entrance entirely, came in through the roof using climbing gear that would have been embarrassing for most Goliaths to employ but which got us inside without triggering alarms. The Escher matriarch was in her personal lab, surrounded by chemical equipment and guarded by her most trusted gangers. We came through the walls, literally smashing through the weakened rockreet with sledgehammers, catching them completely by surprise. The fight was brief and brutal. The Eschers were fast and deadly, their weapons coating us with chemical sprays that would have killed normal humans. But we pushed through the pain, through the burning, and overwhelmed them with focused aggression. I found the matriarch trying to destroy her research data, burning documents and smashing equipment. She was beautiful in the way Escher women were, all deadly grace and chemical-enhanced reflexes. She looked at me with contempt as I approached, her hand moving toward a syringe filled with something that glowed an ominous green. "You're the new forge tyrant," she said. "I heard you were smart enough to deal with Delak. That must have hurt your pride." "Pride doesn't matter," I said. "Survival does. You've been killing my gangers. That stops now." She smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to points. "Kill me and someone else will take my place. The game continues." I shot her through the head with my autogun, the round punching through her skull and spraying brain matter across her precious equipment. "Not if we destroy everything you built." I turned to the gangers with me. Burn it all. Make sure nothing survives. We set the entire lab complex on fire, using the Escher's own chemicals to fuel a blaze that would reduce everything to ash and toxic smoke. The Escher gang would recover eventually, would rebuild and return to their war against us, but for now, they were broken, leaderless, their poison production destroyed. My gang had survived. We returned to the forge hold as heroes. The gangers who had doubted me now saw results, saw that my methods worked even if they were not traditional. Korg, his body failing from the poison that had already done too much damage, acknowledged my success with a grunted, "Good work." He died 3 days later, his organs finally giving out. We rendered his body down to base proteins and fed him to the vats, the same end that awaited all Goliaths eventually. I sat on the Forge Tyrant's throne, a crude seat welded together from scrap metal and decorated with gang trophies. Around me, the forge works roared with activity, the machinery grinding out munitions and equipment that would fund our continued survival. The gangers looked to me for leadership, and I felt the weight of that responsibility like a physical thing pressing down on my shoulders. I had proven that a Goliath could be strong and smart, had shown that intelligence was not weakness but another form of strength, but I also understood that this was just the beginning. The Underhive was full of threats, full of gangs that would see my methods as vulnerability to be exploited. I would have to be constantly vigilant, constantly proving myself, constantly balancing the Goliath way of overwhelming force with the tactical flexibility that had saved us from the Escher poison. The life expectancy of a Goliath gang leader was measured in years at best. I had maybe a decade before my body broke under the strain of the stims, before some younger, stronger ganger challenged me for leadership. But for now, I was Forge Tyrant. I had earned my place through strength and cunning, through violence and planning. I had saved my gang from destruction and proven that thinking was not the same as weakness. The machinery roared, the forges burned, the stims flowed through my veins like liquid fire. This was my life now, brutal and short and violent, but mine. I was Grak, Forge Tyrant of House Goliath, and I would lead my gangers through whatever hell the Underhive threw at us. Because that was what it meant to be Goliath, to be strong enough to endure, smart enough to adapt, and stubborn enough to never surrender no matter the cost. The Emperor protects, but in the end, we could only protect ourselves.